in demonstrating the amazing and the very impactful work that you have been doing. Now, it would be helpful for us to start to understand you as a person a little bit. Where did you grow up? What was your upbringing? I believe you had some influence of the Arya Samaj in your family, and you actually went and graduated as a high voltage engineer. So how come from that family background, that qualification, that engineering, you are where you are? Walk us a little bit through your early years.
Thank you so much, Sunilji, and all the listeners. I was born in an ancient and small town in Madhya Pradesh called Vidisha. It's very close to Sanchi Stupas and the caves of Udayagiri. So it's a historical place. And my father was a police constable, and mother was totally illiterate. She has never been to school, but all her sons and her daughter, only daughter, not only got post-graduated, but some of us got higher degrees. And even my sister was retired as the principal of a girls' college. So the education was something which was close to my parents, and they wanted to educate their children. I went to an ordinary school, the local municipal primary school, and that was my beginning. Then, of course, I had some inclination for machines and electrical appliances, and I used to take out these the irons or watches or clocks and try to fix them, but most of the times I destroyed them. So everybody thought that I have an inclination to become an engineer, and eventually I did it. But it was too late for me to make a decision when I was already in engineering college. And then I realized that there were other challenges in the country, and the children especially were facing those challenges. So what to do? So finally, I decided to give up my career after doing some job. I was teaching in the university for about a year and a half, and then I gave up my career in 1980. And of course, it was not my family. In fact, Sunilji, it was me who was attracted towards the Arya Samaj principles and the life of Swami Dayanand, and started attending the congregations and yaj and sandhyas in the local Arya Samaj temple. That was not liked, never liked by my family, because they were, I won't say that they were orthodox, but they were liberal Hindus, religious people, Sanatani. So it was too hard, especially one day when I decided to throw all my idols. I used to worship them, and believing that the God resides in everything. God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and God is the supreme power. So this way I grew. And of course, I was deeply engaged in social activities as well as the student politics in my own way. Not with any political party, but during the university time, the university politics is different, and I was involved in it. So it went on like that. So it was a tough decision to give up that career after the higher education in engineering, especially when my father passed away when I was young, and then my mother used to sell her ornaments and other things for my studies. So it was very tough for her. And especially when I was embarking upon an issue which was not yet considered an issue in India, like child slavery, child labor. Nobody was talking about it. Laws were not there. There was no media about it. So that was the beginning.
So thank you. So that explains some of your background. Also, I guess, because the Arya Samaj, as you've said often, is actually a reformist movement. It is not really it's not really a religious movement. It's a reformist movement which talks of removing ills, social ills from society. So you have in many ways pursued it fully. You made it your life. At what stage does Kailash Sharma become Kailash Satyarthi? What does that mean?
Well, the Sharma is a common surname for the Brahmins. So my family was a Brahmin family. It was in 1969 when the country was celebrating Mahatma Gandhi's birth centenary, and everybody was talking very high against untouchability and against any sort of discrimination and so on. So I was highly impressed by those local politicians. And in fact, I wanted to become a politician. I thought that my family is practicing untouchability and all kind of caste system. And the Gandhi was much higher. And these people are the devotees and followers of Gandhi. So I decided to do something special or something unique, inviting political and social leaders of my town, Vidisha, for a feast. And the idea was that this feast should be cooked by untouchable women, so-called untouchable women. And those days they were called Harijans. So I requested them, and finally the food was cooked, the invitation was sent. I went every door to invite, but nobody turned up until 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, almost 10 o'clock. Not a single leader who used to speak so loud against untouchability turned up there. And that made me really very angry and I would say frustrated, and it was very difficult, those feelings, anguish. So finally, I requested one of those women to serve food for me, and I took out some food myself later on, and we started eating something. So we were only 5 boys who were the organizers of this event, and 5 or 6 men and women come from that Harijan, so-called Harijan community. And when I started eating the first bite, I broke down and I started crying. And then I felt a motherly touch of an elderly woman who was yet considered untouchable. And that touch was so healing. And she said that, Kailash, why are you crying? You have done something which was never done before. So you should be happy. So that consoled me. But when I went back, I found that there were some caste leaders sitting in my courtyard, and they were all threatening my family to outcast them. And there was huge argument. And finally, the decision was taken that Kailash should be taken to River Ganges to take some holy dip and then feast for Brahmins. And I said, I have not done anything wrong. We create dirt, and these people are cleaners. They clean our dirt. So I'm not dirty. I have not done anything. So finally, they decided that Kailash should be outcasted, not the family. That was not the sin of the family, but the boy. So that night, I was given a separate room in the corner of my courtyard. And then utensils were separated, and water pot was put in my room. And the whole night, I was really very, very angry. And I thought that, who are these people to outcast me? Let me outcast the entire caste system from my life, and that sense of caste system and that discrimination and that divide in India. So I decided to give up my surname. So that was the simplest way, but I was just 15. So it was legally not possible and practically not possible. I had to wait for a few years. And then I decided to give up that Sharma name and gave this name to myself, Satyarthi. That means seeker of truth. So somehow there was also an influence of Satyarth Prakash, the great revolutionary or social reformative text written by Swami Dayanand.
It's wonderful. So, so on the one hand, you have demonstrated that you learned this reform against class hierarchy. I also understand the mohalla in which you grew up had both a temple and a mosque in there. Was there any learning in that for you of how different faiths interact with each other? Are they tolerant? Are they supportive? Are they active? Are they against each other? What was the learning for you at that age? Because clearly you learned a lot of this at a young age.
Yeah. Well, the caste rigidity and social rigidity was definitely there. And the people were honest when they were practicing those things. But there was nothing like hatred or violence or revenge against each other. They used to sit with each other, they talk freely, they love each other, they helped each other, Muslims and Hindus both. There were some Jains also. And of course, there was no Sikh or Christian, but Hindus, Jains, and Muslims. And when I was 4 or 5 years old, the two things went simultaneously in my learning. My father was the devotee of Lord Rama. So instead of teaching me chota a, bada a, choti e, badi e, A, B, C, D, etc., he used to teach through Ramayana, this Ramcharitmanas. So Ra for Ram, Ha for Hanuman, La for Lakshman, things like that. This was one thing. But simultaneously, there was a Muslim cleric in the mosque, and there was also a family. An old lady used to teach to her children and some other neighborhood children. So I started learning Urdu. I started learning Kalma. I started learning some namaz. So I learned many things during my childhood simultaneously. And that was a great impression on my whole life.
That is wonderful, and actually demonstrates in how you have responded yourself in life to people. And we all hope and wish for a society where all communities learn to live each other. And more importantly, we all understand that each one of us can have a different point of view, and that's okay too. Let me bring us to the current situation now. As I said, we are in the midst of a crisis that is unimaginable, unseen beforehand. It's a black swan event that nobody had prepared for. You had made an interesting suggestion recently to the Prime Minister to allow for a 3-month impunity to employers who have child labor. And we know, been against child labor for many, many years. You've advocated against it. What was in your mind? What were you thinking? What do you believe will come out of this?
Well, Sunilji, sometimes the extraordinary situations calls for extraordinary decisions, extraordinary measures. And since my organization has been freeing children from slavery, we gather a lot of information from their parents and from other sources that how these trafficked children are trapped into mines and factories and small workshops and so on, sometimes in household situations as domestic help. So we had some concrete knowledge. For example, in Jaipur, we learned that more than 1,000 children were trapped in a small street making glass bangles. And their employers and the middlemen, contractors, everybody ran away, leaving those children on the fate of the neighborhood. And that was quite serious situation. Similar reports came from Hyderabad, from Mumbai, some parts of Delhi, that the employers went for a safer place. Of course, they were all frightened. But what would happen with those children? So that was quite disturbing. But the most disturbing incident was when I saw on television that a 12-year-old girl, Jamlo, who was trafficked from Chhattisgarh to work as a child laborer in a chili field in Telangana. So after the lockdown, she lost everything and she was desperate to return. So started walking about 150 kilometers. And when she was just short of an hour or less than an hour, close to her village, she fell down and then she collapsed. And the doctors reported that she was suffering acute hunger and she was thirsty, no water. Then I realized that this is intolerable. We cannot accept it. So I wrote to the Prime Minister requesting him that there can be some sort of I won't say the waive off, but some impunity for 3 months. And during these 3 months, if any employer wanted to leave children, they should be pardoned and no legal action prosecution should be taken against them and these children may go back home. But in the meantime, it is the responsibility of the state or sometimes the local organizations, NGOs, philanthropists, etc., to ensure their safety, their food and water and safe return to their homes. I have also offered that my foundation is ready to take up these challenges if the children are freed or children are just liberated. We are ready to take care of them and to make sure that they are repatriated back home safely.
I was going to come to the questions later on that the audience is asking, but there's one which is very connected there. The question here from Avi Chowdhury is asking, during lockdown, everybody's inside. Children are also inside. How do we actually know they are being abused? What is the method? What tool can we use to understand this? Because they may or may not be able to speak out.
Exactly. So that was the reason. The answer lies in this question itself, that we had no knowledge. We could not reach out to them. We could not enter in those premises, those factories and workshops. And so was the situation with the police and other authorities, labor department people and so on. Now, the lockdown is a little bit relaxed. So the government offices are started opening. But in the first and second phases was very, very hard. And that is the reason to request to the Prime Minister. But definitely there were other issues which came to our knowledge, that we have requested one organization that is known as India Child Protection Fund. And they have conducted a study and came out with an alarming, revelation that within the first few days of the first lockdown, the demand for online child sexual abuse material or child porn has gone almost doubled. And that was growing actually exponentially. So that is again a very serious problem, that how children are being used for producing porn material and being used in their chat rooms or being lured away. And eventually many of them can fall into the trap of prostitution and slavery.
You're right. This unfortunately is being reported from not just India, but also from many other countries, which brings me to your work overseas. You're not just working as a foundation here, I believe. You're also working in many other countries. And I also understand many countries, many regulators, many governments actually call you to give them advice or write reports, etc. for them. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing globally?
Yes. So we have been working almost across the globe, but then to be more precise, in 144 countries, almost in every country where the exploitation of children exists. Of course, exploitation and abuses of children exist in all countries in different forms. But we have been focusing on child labor, slavery, trafficking, the issues like that, child sexual abuses. And we are getting reports right from Brazil to Sudan and South Africa. The children are trapped into mines. Some teenage girls in Bangkok or in Cambodia, those who were pushed into commercial sexual exploitation, their miseries have become manifold, and now they are facing hunger, they are facing loneliness, they are facing abandonment and so on. So we started talking on several issues. So there is a group, very informal group has been formed. Former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and he's a very close friend of mine. Similarly, Graça Machel, the veteran human rights leader and wife of Nelson Mandela, and several prime ministers, presidents, or former presidents and prime ministers, and myself got together through virtual connections, and we have jointly appealed European Union in particular to earmark more money, and there should be adequate funding made available to tackle this pandemic. they are not spending enough. So we are calling for a global summit on health, and that should take place as soon as possible, so that governments can not only share or other experts can not only share their experiences and their ask, but also the way forward. But that requires a lot of funding, and that should be made available, especially when President Trump has announced that he's going to withdraw funding of WHO. Similarly, I have been in contact with several dozens of Nobel laureates, not only peace laureates, but we have friendly laureates in all disciplines in science and literature and so on. So some years ago, with my initiative, a platform has been created called Laureates and Leaders for Children. And through that, we are working hard with the governments, but United Nations and the regional groupings like SAARC or African Union, European Union, and so on, to prioritize the issues of children. Because many of the children are falling into, I would say, irreparable losses. They can be trapped into slavery or prostitution. Many more children can become child laborers, bonded laborers. 300 million children and their families who were highly depending on school feeding programs or conditional cash transfer programs, especially in Brazil, Mexico, Nigeria, in many other parts of the world, 70 countries, in fact. So that program is linked with the school attendance. In some countries, including in India, our state governments are doing their best somehow to transfer that money to the accounts of their parents. But this is not enough. We are talking hundreds of millions of families and young people who are left abandoned due to their children are not able to attend the school. So we are working on it. And finally, last 2-3 days ago, we have convened again an urgent meeting of the Laureates and Leaders Group to demand that 20% of the global support, which is coming to counter this problem and for the economic and other revival after the pandemic or the post-pandemic period. So $5 trillion have been committed by the industrialized world or G20 countries. So out of that 5 trillion, we are demanding that 20% of it, means 1 trillion, should reach out to the lowest strata of society, means 20% of the lowest strata or most vulnerable and most marginalized people should be supported with 20% of that amount. So that should go to the last person of society.
That's a very, very good thought. And I will ask you later on how much is actually happening. ये शिव कुमार शिव जी ने एक सवाल पूछा है कि जैसे आपने बोला कि बहुत सारी माइग्रेशन हो रही है, लेबर बहुत सारी जो डिस्प्लेस थी वापस जा रही है, बहुत लोगों के साथ बच्चे, छोटे बच्चे साथ में हैं, और उनके लिए, बच्चों के लिए तो मुश्किल है ही, बड़ों के लिए भी मुश्किल है, साथ में पुलिस भी तंग करती है. What can be done to support them, to help them? How do we ensure safe passage for them to get to their homes or whichever village, whichever place they are from?
Right. तो उसके लिए I am in almost regular contact with several concerned ministers, union ministers, as well as with the chief ministers. मैं लगातार मुख्यमंत्रियों से बात कर रहा हूँ, और हमारे संगठन ने कुछ सलाह उनको दी है. उसमें से एक चीज ये है कि हर 10 किलोमीटर पर लोकल पुलिस, पंचायत लोकल, और अगर सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस या कुछ इस तरह के वॉलंटियर्स हैं या कोई इस तरह के मददगार लोग हैं, तो वो छोटे छोटे ग्रुप बनाए, इनफॉर्मल ग्रुप बनाए, बट it should be primarily conducted by the police and the panchayat, and panchayat should be asked to ensure that कि उन 10 किलोमीटर में जो लोग चल रहे हैं वो आगे ना बढ़ें ज़्यादा, धीरे धीरे करके उनको जब ये ट्रेन वगैरह खुल रही हैं तो उसके माध्यम से जाएं, या स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स बसों का इंतजाम कर रही हैं उससे जाएं। लेकिन रास्ते में जो लोग सड़कों पर हाईवेज पर जो नेशनल हाईवेज पर उन पर चलने के बजाय लोग गांव-गांव से निकल रहे हैं पीछे से डर के मारे पुलिस से, तो उनके डर को दूर करने के लिए पुलिस वहीं उनको रोककर और खाने पीने का इंतजाम करे, और जो सरकारें अपने यहाँ इंतजाम कर रही हैं बसों का और दूसरी चीजों का, उनके माध्यम से उनको भेजा जाए। ये जो खौफ हो गया, ये हैबक हो गया है, जो एकदम एक डिस्परेशन हो गया है उन लोगों में, और सबसे बड़ी बात ये कि भरोसा नहीं है उन्हें किसी पर कि कोई भी उन्हें इज्जत के साथ प्यार के साथ वहां रखेगा। पुलिस से डर रहे हैं, कोरोना से डर रहे हैं, जॉबलेसनेस से डर रहे हैं, और शहर बनाने वाले, स्कूल बनाने वाले, मकान बनाने वाले, पुल और सब कुछ बनाने वाले लोग इतने डर चुके हैं कि वो रुकना नहीं चाहते वहां। आज तक शायद हमारे शहर अपने उन लोगों को जो प्रवासी मजदूर कहा जा रहा है जिन्हें, या जो भी हमें राष्ट्र निर्माता कहना चाहिए उनको, अगर उनको हम इतना सम्मान और कृतज्ञता नहीं दे सकते तो कम से कम एक सुरक्षा का एहसास तो दे सकते हैं सब लोग मिलकर। और वो एहसास जरूरी है। लोग दे रहे हैं पैसा, प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स फंड में दे रहे हैं और जगह पे दे रहे हैं, लेकिन एहसास दिलाना, भरोसा दिलाना उन लोगों के लिए सबसे ज्यादा जरूरी है, और वो सबको मिलकर करना पड़ेगा। मैं धर्मगुरुओं से भी बार बार अपील कर रहा हूँ कि रास्ते में जो भी मंदिर, मस्जिद, गुरुद्वारे पड़ते हैं वहां उनको बुलाकर उनके खाने पीने का कुछ इंतजाम करें। मुझे मालूम है कि भारत के गरीब से गरीब लोग भी एक टाइम के खाने में से कुछ बचा के लोगों की मदद करेंगे, लेकिन भरोसा पैदा करना बहुत जरूरी है।
बहुत वेल सेड। तो आपने स्कूलों की और बच्चों की बात की। वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट डेवलपमेंटल टूल्स एज वी नो इज एजुकेशन थ्रू द स्कूल सिस्टम वर्ल्ड वाइड। इस समय बिकॉज वी आर ऑल लॉक्ड अवे इन आवर प्लेसेस, कि बहुत सारे स्कूलों ने शुरू कर दी है रिमोट क्लासेस, टीचिंग डिजिटली, टीचिंग वर्चुअली, टीचिंग थ्रू द इंटरनेट। लेकिन देयर इज अ सेक्शन ऑफ आवर पॉपुलेशन हु डज नॉट हैव एक्सेस टू द इंटरनेट, हु डज नॉट हैव अ स्मार्टफोन। कई फैमिलीज ऐसी हैं जिसमें एक ही है, वो फादर इज ऑल्सो यूजिंग अपने काम के लिए, एग्रीकल्चर के लिए, मदर इज ऑल्सो यूजिंग, द चिल्ड्रन ऑल्सो यूजिंग। तो in this difficult environment, do you have any recommendation or suggestion of how some kind of thread of continuity can be maintained in education?
So one way which is being suggested or even demanded by the chief ministers and state governments, that there should, some time has to be spared on national television. But of course, the local television, the vernacular media can also help with that, because the local language is important in educating or learning at the local level. So that is there. But I would also like to say that in each village, there are few people who might be having extra phone, or at least phone which has some spare time. They can use that phone in helping others, those boys and girls or those children. So they can sit in the school and maybe sit in the small groups, keeping or maintaining the social distancing and other things, and putting mask and washing hands, everything is possible. तो वो लोग कुछ इसमें कर सकते हैं। हर गांव में 10-20 लोगों को हम लोग रिक्वेस्ट करें, आपके माध्यम से भी, यहाँ से जो लोग सुन रहे हैं वो जिसको जानते हैं सोशल मीडिया पे इसी चीज को चलाएं कि वहाँ जो बच्चे स्कूल से बाहर हैं, and there is no reach of internet, there is no reach of any proper system in those schools, which are very poorly maintained, and they don't have even the basic amenities and basic facilities in schools. So it's not possible at this juncture. लेकिन कोई ना कोई वॉलंटियर करे। हमारे देश में ये बहुत बड़ी ताकत है कि the people can offer themselves for the betterment of society, and let it begin with education. शिक्षा से बड़ा, विद्या से बड़ा तो कुछ और, ज्ञान से बड़ी तो कोई चीज नहीं है। वो अगर लोग करते हैं दान तो बहुत बड़ी बात है।
You have also been known to write about an interesting term that you had coined, the supply chain of gratitude. And interestingly, the Prime Minister also mentioned in some manner about gratitude of the people who work with their hands, the shramik jo hain, or at the same time, he talked of a separate demand and supply chain. Now, why do you think in India, first, we do not respect people who work with their hands? क्योंकि अगर आप जाएं, कोरिया में जाएं, इंग्लैंड में जाएं, जर्मनी में जाएं, people who work with their hands, or even the US, a truck driver is paid more than a normal office executive because he or she is physically working, and that is considered harder work, tougher work, and therefore more rewarding and also respected more. What do we need to do here to start to respect people who work with their hands at any level and every level?
Well, it has a strong psychological dimension compounded with the economic disparities and inequalities. जात पात के साथ ये चीजें जुड़ी रही हैं कि जो सबसे नीचे का सफाई का काम करेगा वो अनटचेबल है, जो कुछ भी नहीं करेगा, सिर्फ अच्छी बात करेगा बैठ के, वो पंडित है, सब लोग उसके पैर छुएंगे और उसको पूजन करेंगे. So ये मेंटलिटी को बदलना बहुत जरूरी है. It is so deeper. It is not just you cannot call it just simply the old style caste system, but that reflects in the division of labor, division of work, and the reward for that labor. So that mentality has to be changed. और उसके लिए दोनों तरफ से, एक तो society has to work hard, but the policies should be devised in such a way that the people who work hard physically also, manually also, they should be rewarded, they should be respected as well. Sometimes the respect comes when you are earning more, when your lifestyle is better in comparison to others, that becomes better. मैं देखता हूँ, आपने जो कहा बिल्कुल सच कहा कि इन देशों में भी, कोरिया वगैरह में, लेकिन देखें कि जो बेस्ट ऑफ द बेस्ट पढ़े लिखे नौजवान हैं, महिलाएं, पुरुष हैं, स्वीडन में, नॉर्वे में, वो स्कूल टीचर बनना चाहते हैं और उनको स्कूल टीचर बना के सबसे ज्यादा इज्जत की जाती है. They don't want to go for engineering or any other kind of thing. They wanted to go to primary school. And I know personally many of them, and we work with them closely. तो ये जो मानसिकता है और नीतियां, दोनों में हमें साथ साथ काम करना होगा, तो इसका असर जरूर पड़ सकता है. लेकिन when I'm talking about the chain of gratitude or supply chain of gratitude, I started thinking that I'm sitting and talking to you so comfortably, I'm safe. And those who are listening to us, they are also feeling safe. But how does this safety come from? The house I'm sitting in, it's a safe house. So I have to be grateful to those masons, painters, electricians, plumbers, everyone who had made it possible so that I'm sitting here comfortably. The electrician, not only just electrician, but the workers and the employers and the factory owners who were responsible for producing those electrical appliances. मेरे घर के बाहर गाड़ी खड़ी है, तो वो गाड़ी को बनाने वाले और आप जैसे लोग, आपकी, हम सब ये सोचें कि हम दुश्मन नहीं हैं एक दूसरे के, हम उनके लिए grateful हों. We have to feel a sense of deeper gratitude. If I'm eating something, it is not just my cook. I have to be thankful to my cook, but also equally thankful, or rather more thankful, to those who produce cereals and vegetables and milk, taking all the risk in their lives, and even their families. Their families have to sacrifice a lot, who are working in the fields in difficult situations, in difficult terrains. So I have to be grateful to each one of them. Similarly, I'm wearing the good clothes. So I should be thankful to my tailor and designer and transporter and the shopkeeper and everyone. So when I start igniting this thing, it's a good practice. That's a good learning to feel connected with others with a sense of gratitude, a sense of responsibility comes out of it. And eventually it helps in igniting compassion, so that once we feel the suffering of others as our own suffering, with a drive to act to overcome that suffering, we ignite that power of compassion from inside. So gratitude could be a good beginning.
I can confirm that we were fortunate. Even from a very young days, we saw this in our parents and our grandparents. And my father was actually well known for this. Anybody who came to him with anything, regardless of whether he was a peon in the office, the cook at home, the domestic. He would always say thank you for whatever they did every single time.
I remember I have met your mother and father and my wife, in fact, and my wife's family, Wazari Samaji, of course, and they established the Anand Sansthan and the Jangyan Prakashan and the Ved Bhas, वो चारों वेदों का हिंदी भाषा उन्होंने छापा. So आपकी family के साथ उन लोगों का बहुत अच्छा रिश्ता था, and I remember that they were supported by your father and mother both.
Yes. So let me go to another question from Dr. Manasi Gore, I presume. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. The question asks is, how do you see the reverse migration going on right now? What is the motivation of these daily wage earners, even when they know they may have no work where they are going?
Well, as I said before, that we have not been able to build some sort of confidence in them, a trust relationship where they can feel safe in the cities in spite of all this. Nobody is safe. Everybody is really facing that uncertainty and that fear. But that fear of those people who could not still feel that the cities and towns are their homes, they wanted to go back home for safety. They wanted to do it any cost. They are walking hundreds and thousands of miles everywhere in the country and in many other parts of the world, not only in India, because that is something which is needed. So when I'm talking about creating the supply chain of gratitude, if we learn that gratitude for future in the post-coronavirus era, I think we will be able to build a different kind of industry relationship as well as personal relationship, social relationship, and that would be, I think, much more effective. That will help in enhancing our productivity, but it will also help in, as I said, a different level of industry relationship if from both sides we learn to be grateful to each other.
So there are many questions around this. I will not repeat them because they're quite close to what you are, in a sense, responded to that. There's one question from Ridula, which I'm going to answer myself. The question says, don't you think that mainly trust can only be built by governments because common man can only help through money and food to some extent, as you explained? My belief is that trust has to be built by all of society. Every one of us has a role in this. Government, in fact, is nobody and nothing until we pick a government. So it is our role and our responsibility towards being responsible citizens. I think all of us have a role to play, not only get something from the country, but give something back to society, community. And that is what makes for a good country. I'm sorry I've taken up the
absolutely. So, you made my life easy.
I want to ask you, what do you think will be the big changes that will happen in society due to this COVID-19? It's expected this will last for about a year, year and a half, maybe even 2 years longer. But at some point, hopefully we will come out of it and life may limp back to normal. And part of it will be the new normal. And in the interim, we are facing something that I've been calling the new abnormal. So what do you think will be the big changes that might happen in the interim and post recovering from this?
Well, it's very, very difficult to predict, but we can imagine something on the basis of the trends we see. So one thing is very clear that it's a very, very serious health crisis, and it has exposed the whole world. The rich and industrialized countries were also exposed that they were not prepared for any eventuality like that. Of course, not like that, but they didn't have even enough number of simple things in the hospitals, ventilators, etc. And that is also the unprecedented economic crisis, and that will definitely resulting in slowdown of economy. The World Bank, the Moody's, IMFs, and other independent agencies are predicting certain things and coming out with a report which are quite alarming, or I would say quite scary in that sense. So that will definitely increase unprecedented unemployment, joblessness, and so on. But I would also think that it's a moral crisis. It is also a crisis of civilization. So our way of thinking, our way of behavior, many things will change. We have seen that how the people who are locked down, feeling loneliness and anxieties and depression and violence, domestic violence is increasing, as you rightly pointed out. So these things are happening. But when I'm saying that it's a serious moral epidemic, means the soul of globalization was under the threat for several years due to the geopolitics and the geoeconomy, much more localized economic thinking and the priorities were set. But now, on one hand, we can feel that we live in a common world, and that commonality should be converted into, I would say, globalization of compassion or universalization of responsibility and finding the common solutions to common problems and so on. But the difficulty is that the countries who are facing these problems, they would confine to themselves for their own recoveries. And that means a lot of money which goes to development aid or humanitarian aid would be synced. And that would be a serious problem, that when they squeeze the money and they are not going to put it to the African countries especially, or the least developing countries for education, for healthcare and other things. So that is there. So one of the things which we are demanding and advocating for that, and something is happening already. There are so many other players and the moral leaders, political leaders are raising this issue, that there should be some sort of immunity for repayment of debts from the least developing countries or least developed countries. So that will help. But the difficulty is that, as I said, that they have to revive their own economies, and the priorities would be different. Similarly, the whole character of philanthropy, the whole character of CSR will also change. The priorities would be survival, livelihood, income generation, etc., etc. And that is obvious, health also. So when we talk of human dignity and human rights, liberty, and some of those fundamental principles which were laid down in not only in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or other texts, but also the national constitutions. I'm quite afraid that the world would be able to give adequate attention to the sustainable development goals, which were agreed, not only principles, but they were, or not just the guiding principles, but they were commitment, common global commitment. So that is a big question. So in this situation, we have to think that how the personal interpersonal relationship would also affect when we would love to work from home. That is happening now. Then what would be a kind of emotional socialization or human touch could be revived, and that should not go on forever. Otherwise, that is resulting in deep depression and alienation and loneliness and whatnot. So many psychological problems.
All right, you're right. There is a real fear right now that in the attempt for survival, that the allocation of resources will shift towards directly returning economic activities, because the activities that you spoke about, a lot of them which result in developmental goals, actually are not self-returning activities. They need support, they need help, they need nurturing to a point where they can manage themselves. And those, unfortunately, are likely to suffer. The questions also being asked are, what about those who have no ability to support themselves? Physically handicapped, mentally challenged, the elderly, the displaced. There are many in our society who are disadvantaged for various reasons. And these could be social reasons, these could be physical And I think we are using the wrong term, by the way. The distancing that we are doing is physical distancing. Social distancing is the last thing we should be doing in this. We need to stay connected. Many of us have found ways to do regular calls with each other, video calls, phone calls, so that you actually remain in touch and you can ask about each other's welfare as well. But there is at this moment a concern and a fear that many of the certainly achievement of the development goals looks like will get pushed back. So do you have any recommendation, any suggestion? I'm now picking little bits and pieces out of the different questions, because many questions have come, including things like there was a smart city initiative. Now, one thing people used to say, smart city is about technology, about fuel, etc., use less of this, etc. But more and more people looked at it, said smart city is about holistic living. A smart city is also one which is an art city, where you nurture art, culture, and your history and the ethos of your very being. So can a smart city in some manner help improve the disadvantages that you spoke about, that children have, that the disadvantaged have?
Absolutely. It's a very, very good question.
I'm sorry, I made up this question of many different parts that I saw around here.
So it's more holistic and very, very, very appropriate. I have posed an idea to some of the governments before this pandemic broke down, that smart cities should have an essential component of being child-friendly city. And the first child-friendly smart city has been launched in Dehradun, and the Chief Minister invited me, so I was there to launch that city because it was our idea. And the core ingredient of that were that there should not be any child beggar, child laborer in the city. There should not be any child who is suffering due to the physical disability or mental disability. So special efforts have to be made for their education or well-being, healthcare especially. Of course, the child city had that component. The smart city has that component that the people with special ability or the young people should be given basic amenities, but we are pushing for, especially for the children, there should not be any child sexual abuse in the entire city, and a lot of work has to be done by the communities and the teachers, parents, and the state. So this was launched just a week before the lockdown, or say 10 days before the lockdown, just 2 or 3 days before Holi. So we are suggesting that and working on this idea that if we are able to make these cities child-friendly city gradually with a strong component of well-being and protection of rights of children, it is also possible, or equally possible, to incorporate other marginalized sections of society, not just children, but the marginalized women, the marginalized, workers, and so on. And I would say that, and I have been saying to the government that this should be our yardstick, and we should always remember so many Mahatma Gandhi for so many things, not for challenging the untouchability as I did, but the talisman he has given to Jawaharlal Nehru, that whenever you make any policies, that then sit for a while quietly, close your eyes, and think of the last person of society, the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable. And if your policies and your investment can bring the smile and happiness on the face of that last person, should get the green signal. Otherwise, just abandon it, because these policies are useless. So I think this talisman should be used for everything, that whatever investment we make through our government policies, or whatever policies we make, eventually the most marginalized and left out person should be helped, and nobody should be left behind.
So we have 5 minutes left to go, and I have a large number of questions which I've not addressed yet, and I had a couple of them which I had wanted to ask myself. So I will try and combine a few of them again. But you're right. One thing that's being said now is that the response to the COVID-19 pandemic cannot be based on science alone, cannot be based on science and technology alone, cannot be science, technology, health alone. It also has to be economic. It also has to be social. It also has to be empathy. And it has to be societal combined. Whatever meets all of those criteria should be the only response that we use, because there are people suffering differently. Everybody's suffering, but people suffering differently that we need to carry alongside us. And each life is a valuable life on the planet. Each one of us has a role to play. So I'm going to ask you in the last 4 minutes to go now, how are you spending your time in this lockdown? What do you do with yourself?
Almost every day there is a webinar or Zoom conference, almost with some universities in India and abroad also, but also with different groups. And as I said before, that I'm pushing this agenda of 20% aid should go to the 20% most marginalized and so on. So working with the laureates, and so making phone calls to my laureate friends is also not easy, because everybody says that they are much more busy than before, because there is a serious demand for motivation and inspiration and boosting of the morale of the society and people. So that goes on. But a funny thing I would like to share, that Sumedha ji, my wife, and I started walking during lockdown at 6:30. Earlier, I used to go to 7:30 or so, go for a walk. So I found that there were 15, 20 people still on the road, or even more in the small, not on the road, the small street in front of our house. Then we decided that we should prepone it to 5:30. So when we started walking at 5:30, there were about 6, 8 people, and they were much more courageous than us. I used to put mask, my wife used to put mask, but these people were just walking without mask, and that made us fight. And then some people started recognizing me and jumping to shake my hand, and I said, "No, namaste, sir. आप हाथ मत मिलाइए, भले ही मैं कैलाश सत्यार्थी हूँ, तो मैंने और बड़ा मास्क लगा दिया." So things like that. Then we decided that we will start walking at 4 o'clock. So we have to get up at almost 3:30 every day. Said, though nobody is found on the street, we can walk safely, and we are not going to create problems for others. So our walking time is between 4 and 5, but we have to make our tea yourself, and then after having tea, we walk and come back and again have some tea. So the day begins like that. And then,
I will make a slight distinction. I don't think people who are walking around without a mask are brave. I think that's being foolish in today's world. I think it's important that all of us continue to maintain the discipline that is expected of us, because only if each one of us safe are we all safe together. That is the battle that we are all fighting right now. I have run out of time, but I am going to ask you one last question. This is an interesting one. But I'm combining a few. Akhlaq Hussain has asked this question. What is your opinion on the extreme hatred being seen on social media platforms? What is the role of media in this, and how to restore love and peace and trust amongst all? Your advice on this, and we will wrap up after this.
It's most unfortunate that some people are using this difficult time for spreading hatred. That is unacceptable in any means, at any cost. I would be the last person to even consider this thing, to think that who is right and who is wrong. Every Indian, every human being should feel that we are one. And if we are not able to feel this oneness now, when are we going to do it? One single act of hatred is a virus. It is not just coronavirus, but the virus of communal hatred is equally contagious and infectious, and that has to be killed right away through love and compassion. Those who can spread compassion, they should do. Governments and the social media platforms and the data service providers must take the responsibility. If any one post of hatred is put on any social media platform, we have to stop it through love.
Thank you very much. So this was called the BMU Masterclass series, and I'm glad that we had you as a faculty for this class, because truly you are a demonstration of the possibility of the human being's capacity to love, to support, and true human endeavor. So thank you very much for being with us today. And thank you for this wonderful set of reasoning and explanation and guidance on what we ought to do and what we must not do. So thank you all very much. And namaskar and namaste, everyone.